I know this is sudden, but can you stay at my place for a month, starting next month? This utterly unexpected request came from the newly transferred female chief, who had suddenly called me in. It was more than enough to throw me into a state of confusion. This utterly unexpected request came from the newly transferred female chief, who had suddenly called me in. We're not close enough for me to be living at her place. Excuse me. While I was taken aback, the chief blushed, fidgeting in embarrassment. Through this request from the chief, my life was about to take a significant turn. My name is Thomas Mason. I'm 32 years old and work at an elderly care facility. I've always loved interacting with older folks since I was a kid, being quite the granny's boy, so caregiving is the perfect job for me. However, the caregiving staff at work are mostly women in their 50s and 60s, and there are only 2 men, me and the chief. That's why the chief and I often take on heavy lifting, and I was a little dissatisfied with the unfair division of work. But I can't voice such complaints to female staff. The chief, who was the only one I could rely on, has already passed the age of 65 and will retire. Once the chief retires, will I help everyone with their work? Well, until now, the work was finished because the chief helped me with the work. Such thoughts filled my mind, and I couldn't help but sigh. Then, the chief retired in no time, and a 35-year-old female chief was assigned from another department. My name is Kay Scott. Nice to meet you all. When she introduced herself to us, I felt that Miss Scott suddenly looked surprised when her eyes met mine, and quickly averted her gaze. Then, she continued with her greeting. What's going on? Does she know me? But I don't know her. I started working, with a little strange feeling. Unlike the previous chief, the new chief did not seem intimidated by the older staff in their 50s and 60s and was not shy about giving work instructions. Helen, one of the residents is calling you. Please attend to them. Jessica, you left meal assistants halfway to guide someone else to their room, didn't you? Please finish one task before moving on to the next. The new chief was brisk in her directives and closely observed the movements of the caregiving staff, giving necessary corrections. There was no wasted motion in her work, and her directions and reminders were always on point. However, the Queen Bee staff, who had been there for many years, didn't like being instructed by a younger chief. She's acting high and mighty for being so young. She's getting carried away just because she's the chief. Complaints about the chief had become commonplace at work. And for some reason, the chief didn't give me any work instructions. It was as if she thought, you can handle things on your own, right, even without her saying it. Seeing this, the Queen Bee staff members started complaining about the chief again. It's weird how she only gives us instructions and doesn't say anything to Thomas. She's probably just buttering him up because he's a man. Pathetic for a chief. Whenever I was in the staff room, I could always hear people bad-mouthing the chief. I was getting wary of hearing it, so I started spending more time chatting with the residents and less time in the staff room. However, being out of the staff room meant my paperwork wasn't progressing at all. I was getting tired of feeling like I didn't have a place at work and my work was not moving forward. That's why I asked her for instructions. What should I do? Is there any work that I can handle? After saying that, I approached the chief on my own. Then, finally, the chief said to me, "All right, then do this," and started to assign tasks to me. But the tasks given to me were things like changing sheets and cleaning the floors. It was obvious that these tasks were not caregiving duties, just odd jobs. Seeing me accepting these tasks from the chief, the Queen Bee staff members started bad-mouthing the chief again behind her back. That chief, she's definitely pandering to men. Changing the work she assigns based on gender and age, she's really a wicked woman. The behind-the-back talk from the Queen Bee staff members was only increasing day by day. I started racking my brain about how I could improve the relationships at work. During such a time, I was called by the chief to the conference room. Did I do something? I couldn't think of anything. Well, it doesn't matter. Since I was called by the chief, I might as well discuss the interpersonal issues as well. As I was walking towards the conference room with various thoughts, I noticed the chief fidgeting with an unusually embarrassed look. When I asked, is there something you need from me? She just kept looking down without saying a word. While I was watching the chief with curiosity, she finally opened her mouth. I'm sorry for the sudden request, but can you stay at my place for a month next month? What? I was confused by the sudden, unexpected request from the chief. I'm going on overseas training, so, could you look after my cat for me? Saying so, the chief handed me her house keys, fidgeting with a bashful look. Ah, so that's what this is about. Although I understood, I felt a strange sense of urgency about this unexpected request from the chief. Why me? Aren't there other people you could ask? When I asked the chief that, she looked at me with a blush and said, there's no one else I can ask. That's why I'm asking you, Thomas, and gazed intently at me. Looking at the chief's embarrassed, yet serious eyes, I couldn't refuse. Well, if you're okay with me, I'll do it. As I muttered that, the chief's face lit up all at once. Really? Well, I'm counting on you next month then, she said, now, back to work, and walked out of the meeting room with a spring in her step. I could only stand there, dumbfounded, watching the cheerful figure of the chief retreat. No matter if she didn't have anyone else to ask, why me? I'm not particularly close to the chief. With those thoughts in mind, I returned to my workspace. It was strange that the chief would entrust all her personal and home matters to me, a mere employee. As I thought about various things, I felt strange about the chief's attitude and had a vague feeling. At the end of the workday, I decided I had to refuse the chief's request and stayed behind in the office. However, the chief was caught up in preparing for her overseas training. She was discussing the training with the office staff, receiving explanations about the flow of the day, meeting up with the translator, and so on. In our nursing home, there is an annual overseas training program for caregivers, nurses, and dietitians. They visit countries known for their advanced welfare systems, like Sweden, Denmark, and New Zealand, to observe and learn about their caregiving techniques in local hospitals and elderly homes. Usually, experienced employees attend to reflect on their usual caregiving tasks. But it seems that they couldn't gather participants this year. And apparently, the caregiver who was supposed to go suddenly couldn't make it due to a family matter. It was understandable then that the chief, who had recently transferred, was suddenly set to go on overseas training next month. As the chief busied herself with preparations for the overseas training, a month passed without me being able to say a word. The spare key she had given me still remained in my bag. The day before the chief's overseas training. Is she really going tomorrow? As I stared at the key I had received from the chief and thought about various things, the chief, who was about to go on her overseas training the next day, called out to me. Could you drop by my place after work today? From tomorrow, I'll be relying on you to take care of my home daily. Upon hearing the chief's voice, I ended up having dinner at the chief's house after work that day. For some reason, although I should be visiting the chief's house for the first time, the apartment building seemed vaguely familiar. I thought about it for a while, but in the end, I couldn't remember anything, and with a feeling of unease, I entered the chief's home. As soon as I stepped into the chief's home, something black flew across in front of me. Huh, what? As I stood there in surprise, the cat, which had been on top of the cat tower until a moment ago, dashed into the depths of the room with great speed. She's incredibly shy around people. She's never let any visitors touch her. The chief explained this while putting down her bag, donning an apron, and starting to prepare dinner. Wait a minute, I've never owned a cat before. There's no way I can take care of one that's so timid. When I voiced my concerns, the chief waved me over to the kitchen and said, "Come over here." She then proceeded to teach me about the proportions and timing for preparing cat food and water. She even showed me how to clean the litter box. But even if I understand how to take care of her, I don't think I'll be able to bond with her. When I voiced this concern with a sigh, the chief responded, "You don't have to force yourself to get along with her. Just make sure you feed her and take care of the litter box. That's all you need to do." I was overwhelmed by the chief and reluctantly said, "I understand. I learned only the basics of cat care from her." Then, the chief hastily cooked dinner for me and left early the next morning for an overseas training program. The next day, I continued with my regular work as usual. Today, as well, I was busy with work, and before I knew it, it was past the regular time. "Oh, no, I have to take care of the cat," I exclaimed and quickly stood up, hastily clocked out, and headed towards Chief's house. When I arrived at the house, a swift black figure dashed past me. Looking up, I saw a cat tower next to the front door, and from it, the cat jumped down and fled into the room. Is it okay to jump down from such a high place? If this continues, she'll eventually get hurt. Saying so, I went into the room to replenish the cat's food and clean the litter box. As I did this, the cat was watching me intently through a gap in the sliding door of the bedroom. Come to think of it, I hadn't asked the chief for the cat's name. I took the liberty of naming her Fluffy and tried to beckon her over, but the cat hissed in intimidation. I worried that this situation might be causing the kitty some stress. I said to her, "I'm going home now, make sure you eat your food," and left Chief's house. For about a week, I went over to Chief's place daily. The cat seemed to find it strange that I, a stranger, not its owner, was visiting the house every day to feed it and clean its litter box. Slowly, she started venturing out from behind the sliding door of the bedroom, tentatively sniffing my back. However, she would jolt and retreat back to the bedroom whenever I moved. Despite this, I felt like I was gradually closing the distance with the cat. In order not to startle her, I'd carefully place a treat in front of her, keeping my movements to a minimum. Then, even though she'd contemplate returning to the bedroom for a moment, she'd sniff at the treat and take a bite. With such persistent efforts, the cat started to come near me. She would sniff the hem of my clothes, back hunched in caution. She would surely bolt at an incredible speed if I made any sudden move. I was unable to move, frozen in place for several minutes. But today, I started work early at 7 a.m. and worked overtime. I ended up missing my lunch break and was famished. I desperately wanted to eat something, but I couldn't move. My hunger eventually won over, and I decided to move slowly. The chief had previously told me, "You can eat anything you find in the house." I got up as if in slow motion and went to the kitchen. Then, I opened the refrigerator and scanned its contents just with my eyes. For some reason, the cat did not run away, but slowly followed me, then just sat there watching me. I couldn't figure out what to eat, so I pulled out a fruit jelly that the chief had bought and placed it on the table. The cat, from under the table, looked up at me curiously as I sat there eating the fruit jelly for dinner. With all of this going on, I naturally became closer to the cat, and before I knew it, she didn't run away even when I touched her. In fact, she began to rub against me and purr. I had no idea why I was so favored, and of course, I couldn't ask the cat. I was filled with a sense of wonder, as I'd never touched a cat before. I was fascinated by how soft and comforting the cat was. Without realizing it, playing with Chief's cat had become my only source of comfort after a hard day's work. Today marks the final day of the Chief's overseas business trip. As always, I looked forward to playing with the cat and headed over to her house. Unusually, the cat was waiting for me at the entrance. "Ah, a welcome party, thank you," I said to the cat, giving it a scratch. As I was doing so, I felt something odd on my hand. What's this? Was this here before?" I thought to myself, feeling the cat's belly once again, and there it was, a lump, small like a marble. I don't know anything about cats, but the thought of the cat being sick filled me with anxiety. In a panic, I looked for a 24/7 veterinary clinic and rushed there. To my surprise, the vet's eyes widened in shock. "This seems to be a skin tumor. At this size, it would be very difficult to find unless you're frequently touching and checking the cat's body. Good find," he said. With a reassuring smile, he continued, "Given the small size, we can likely remove it completely with immediate surgery. We'll have to look at the pathology report for certainty, but we should schedule the surgery as soon as possible." Despite being a popular clinic with a 1-month waiting list for surgeries, it turned out there had been a recent cancellation, so I could book the surgery. I scheduled the surgery right there, and given my worry about the cat, I decided to stay at Chief's house for the night. This house, it felt familiar somehow, but it wasn't a place I knew. With that thought nagging at me, I laid down on the living room couch, petting the cat until, before I knew it, I fell asleep. The following day, the chief returned from her overseas training. "Was everything okay? Did anything happen?" The chief rushed over to me with a worried look. "I'm fine, but..." I stammered, then told her about the cat's illness. "What, you noticed that?" The chief was surprised that the cat, who usually didn't let anyone else touch it, allowed me to pet it daily. After her overseas training, she returned to a whirlwind of preparing for a presentation at a meeting and arranging for the cat's surgery. The cat's surgery, which I was worried about, was a success. The results of the pathological examination revealed that it was a malignant tumor. However, because it was discovered early, the cancer was completely removed, and the possibility of metastasis was considered very low. When she finally had a moment of calm, she wanted to thank me again, and I was invited to her house. As soon as I arrived at her house, the cat, with its eyes shining, approached me with its tail up. Watching me and the cat, who kept rubbing up against me fervently, the chief started to speak. "You've always been such a perfect gentleman, even back then. I can see why my sister and the cat chose you." I widened my eyes and asked, "What do you mean?" But as I looked at her face, I remembered something. I was always a bit more mature than my classmates in elementary school, partly due to my physical build. I know it might sound weird to say this, but I was a bit of a heartthrob and was quietly popular among the girls. In the 6th grade, I became an official couple with my first love, and our relationship lasted until middle school. Looking at us, her sister would watch us with an envious look, like "You guys are lucky." Could it be? "You're the sister of my first love." When I said that to the chief, he laughed with a bright smile and said, "Did you just notice?" Then, she told me a story. After my first love and I broke up in middle school, her parents divorced. Her sister went to live with their mother, and the chief went with their father. Their father passed away from cancer a few years ago. She hasn't been able to get in touch with her sister or her mother. Feeling left behind and lonely, Kay started keeping a cat a few years ago. This house is actually her childhood home, but it's changed a lot recently as the area has been developed into a new residential area. The apartment was also renovated, which is why I didn't recognize it. To distract herself from her loneliness, she had been putting on a brave face at work. And then, she was transferred to my apartment, and we were reunited. I secretly had a crush on you as I watched how seriously you cared about my sister. Saying that, the chief smiled shyly. Unlike when she was at work, she had a really kind and cute atmosphere. I felt an electric shock course through me, blindsided by this unexpected revelation of our past connection. From that moment, I found myself frequently visiting her house to see the cat. You've done so much for the cat. It's gotten much better thanks to you. I can't thank you enough. She'd repeatedly expressed her gratitude, to which I replied that I wanted something in return. When she asked what I wanted, without missing a beat, I pointed towards the entrance hall and said, "I'll take that." She looked confused until I held up the spare keys to her house. This is what I meant. Understanding dawned on her, and her cheeks flushed a sweet pink. She was so cute that I hugged her. From that day on, our relationship officially started. "Just keep it quiet at work, okay?" she asked shyly. I noticed a softening in her personality since we started dating. Hasn't the chief been particularly nice to us lately? Maybe something good happened. Has she got a boyfriend now? As I watched her laugh off the remarks from the Queen Bee staff, I felt a sense of relief and couldn't help but smirk. I hope you enjoyed the story. Subscribing to the channel can be a great motivation for us. See you in the next video.